Welcome everybody to Burlington and beyond. Tonight we have a very special guest with us tonight, one that everybody should know at this point. His name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. He's to my right, and Dr. Shiva is running for U.S. Senate. Chief opponent will be the Elizabeth Warren, current Senator Elizabeth Warren, and the Republicans haven't quite decided who they are going to run yet. On my left is Joan Kennedy, and she has some special questions to be asking tonight of Dr. Shiva. And Dr. Shiva, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about your background, a little bit about where you're from and how you got here. Would you mind?
Sure. People like me aren't, frankly, supposed to run for U.S. Senate. I didn't come from a wealthy family or a famous family. In fact, Larry, I didn't actually come from a typical Indian family. My mom came from a broken home. This is in India. Her father abandoned her and her 8 siblings when she was a child. And my father grew up in war-torn Burma, and his first schoolhouse was under a mango tree when he was 10 years old. And in spite of that, my mom ended up getting a master's degree in mathematics at a time when women were supposed to sit at home. And you're talking about now, on top of it, we were considered low-caste untouchables or deplorables in India.
That's the lowest class, right?
Yeah. And on top of that, my dad ended up becoming a very successful engineer. So, I, as a kid, was born in Bombay, slums all around me. And I also grew up in a small village with my grandparents who worked 16 hours a day, planting rice and cotton, and in a small subsistence farm. So by all accord, the Indian caste system was based on where you were born determines your destiny or your fate. But what my parents showed me was, or my grandparents, was through grit, determination, that you could overcome, and you could determine your own destiny. So that's what I grew up as a kid learning. So, but in spite of that, coming to America was, 1 in a trillion, if you really think about that, even within those conditions. And in early 1970, my dad was invited to the United States because of his incredible skill. He came here with $75 in his pocket. We had to wait, close to a year, my sister, myself, and my mom, and then we came here. And then we settled in Paterson, New Jersey, one of the poorest cities in the United States. So we had to start a whole new life, a very traditional Indian family moving at a time to America where there were sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? It's a turn of Vietnam is still going on. The counterculture movement is taking place.
Right. Movements going on.
So we it was literally coming from India to here in that environment. So a huge east-west, cultural difference in many levels. But I found Paterson was completely segregated, right? Primarily African American, if you can think about it, right? And then my parents were interesting people. They believed, as my great-grandfather did, in education. My great-grandfather, by the way, was an indentured servant. I don't know if people know, the first quote-unquote slaves were actually from South India, went to Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, they were taken on ships, and you had to work your ship journey off. Right. And that's what my great-grandfather was. He went to Burma. And then, but anyway, so I come from a very interesting background. Right. So you won't find a lot of Indians like me here either. So I was always, as a child, exposed to 2 different kinds of systems that I was interested in. One was the fact that there were systems of oppression, like the caste system, which I was very intrigued by, in my interest in politics as a kid. And the other was my grandmother, believe it or not, was a village healer. Not only did she work in the fields, but on weekends, she could observe your face. She could determine what was going on inside your body using India's traditional system of medicine, and she would diagnose the local villagers, and I saw her empirically heal people. So I grew up with a deep interest in politics and also in medicine. So when I came to the United States, those things were within me. So by the time I was 14, because of my interest in medicine, I knew you had to work very hard in academics. I had finished calculus by the age of 14. My parents, by the way, moved from Paterson, then to Clifton, then to Parsippany, and to Livingston. By the way, if you look at those zip codes, the property taxes get higher and the school systems get better. Right. And those are basically all public school systems. My parents really didn't like the concept of private school. They thought it was somewhat disingenuous.
Okay, fair enough.
So by the time I was 14, I'd finished up calculus. I worked very hard, you know, and I ended up getting accepted to a special computer science program at New York University when I was a 14-year-old kid. And
So were you taking like a train into the city of New York?
I did. So in the summer, so think about this. My parents would, my
They had a
mom
lot
would
of
drop
trust
me
in
off
you.
at 6 a.m. Well, you're talking about in the 70s when, you know, kids were allowed to travel. Nowadays, people are
Oh, right, yeah.
afraid to send their kids anywhere.
Down the
I used to
street.
take the
Yeah.
train from Newark into the heart of, Washington Street,
Right.
Bleecker Street, where NYU is, where people would be selling drugs
Oh,
and
yeah,
everything.
sure.
And I'd walk through there as a kid, go to class. It was 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. I graduated top of the class in this very intensive, it was almost like a Navy SEAL, like computer programming
Academically
class.
speaking, though, right? Okay.
Academically speaking.
All right.
Graduated top of that, and now I still had some high school courses left. So my high school teacher, a woman, an incredible woman, changed the rules so I could finish up my high school courses and then travel to Newark, where I'd gotten a full-time job, working as a research fellow at a small medical college, which is now part of Rutgers University.
So at age 15, you were a research
14, at age 14.
fellow? Did you know the TV show Doogie Howser?
I don't know. I think I've seen it now. But you got to understand, I played baseball.
Okay.
I mowed lawns.
Okay.
I was, played soccer. Our school was one of the biggest divisions, undefeated soccer team. I played center half.
Okay.
So the notion is, my parents felt that you should do both. My dad, particularly academics, as well as sports. It was,
Okay.
what we've done in this country more recently is we've pigeonholed people. Oh, if you do well in math, you must be a nerd, and you can't obviously throw a baseball, right?
Right.
And inversely, if you throw a baseball and you're a jock, you can't be smart. And
no
the media
calculus,
has a lot to do with this whole celebrity culture, pigeonholes people. It's a longer discussion, but yes, I did both.
Okay.
But I started working full-time. I'd work 8 to 16-hour days while I was doing high school. And I was given a very interesting challenge.
Wow.
Many people over the age of 40 will know, and this is 1978, here in this medical school, like in most organizations communicated two ways in those days, right?
Right.
One was they used the phone, the landline phone, right? And the other was they had this very interesting thing called the inter-office mail system.
Okay.
And the inter-office mail system, every office was a secretary, and she had a physical desktop. To those people who don't know, there was a physical desktop, and on that desktop was an inbox, an outbox,
Right.
file folders. Underneath was a trash can.
Right.
On the table was a thing called a typewriter with a typewriter which
Right.
you would
Keys.
put paper into, and on the paper you'd write a thing called a memo, and the memo had a very particular structure: to, from,
Date.
subject. You would put sometimes carbon paper to do a carbon copy of that memo, and then you'd have little paper clips where you had attachments. If you were going to hire someone, you would use the inter-office mail system. You would write a cover letter: Dear Joan, Larry, we're thinking of hiring this person. You'd write a memo, you'd attach their resume, and you'd pass it around, you'd forward it. I was asked to convert that entire system in 1978 into the electronic version. Now, albeit there were simple ways you could do simple text messages, that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about converting that entire system, every feature, into the electronic version, which the military-industrial complex had thought impossible, by the way, at that time. But I didn't think it was impossible, because, by the way, many of these intellectual elites considered women and secretaries sort of not capable of handling the computer. They had their own elitist attitudes. So my goal was to move the secretary from the typewriter to the keyboard. So I wrote 50,000 lines of software code, converted every feature in that inter-office mail
binary code.
system,
Oh.
and I called that system email, a term never used in the English language. And several years later, I got the first United States copyright, officially recognizing me as the inventor of email, because in those days, the only way to protect software was through copyright.
Right.
Then I went off to MIT, in and out of there. I did a bunch of degrees, started many companies, produced lots of jobs in Massachusetts.
Going to MIT, is that what brought you to this state?
Yeah, and it's interesting.
This
My
area?
journey to MIT was interesting. Now, I went to a high school, which was one of the wealthiest high schools. We started from the poorest high school to the wealthiest. I
state
think there
of
was
New Jersey, okay.
close to 1,000 kids in my graduating class, 4,000 kids in that high school. And I was top of the class. No one ever told me about MIT. In those days, you got to understand, I went to a predominantly Jewish high school, and no one should take this the wrong way, but we were the Indian kids. No one had, me and my sister were the two dark-skinned Indian kids. And the notion was that, these kids can't be smart, right? There were, so no one ever advised me. No one even told me about MIT. No one
How
told
do
me.
you know to put your application there? Does someone finally pull you aside?
This is a very interesting
yeah.
story. My dear mom, who's an amazing woman.
Mathematician, right?
Yeah, she's the one. She had helped these two women who didn't have a place to stay. One of them had gotten divorced from her husband,
Okay.
was kicked out, and she was at, I think, the local A&P in those days, Stop and Shop. And they
Right,
were,
sure,
And she
yeah.
said, why don't you stay? We have a place. So these two women stayed there. One of them had a friend, and he came to my home 2 weeks before I had to apply. He goes, why don't you apply to this place? And he had the brochure. I go, what is this? He said, it's called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's the leading technology institute in the world. And I said, I've never heard of this. So I didn't apply because I just wanted to actually do design and do carpentry. I think I'd applied to a local school.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was like, I had programmed computers. I was sort of done with that, you know?
Okay.
And this guy came again, and he wouldn't leave, I think 2 days before the application was due until I would apply. He wouldn't leave my home. So I took a pencil and I filled it out, submitted it, and I got accepted. And then my high school says, oh yeah, we should have told you about that, because remember, they get points when a student gets accepted into these big universities.
What
So
do
it's
you
a-
mean points? Explain that. I
Well,
don't know that.
a high school's eminence is by how many of his
Oh,
graduates go
sure.
to big
Okay. How many get
universities.
into an Ivy?
Yeah.
Okay. I get that.
So MIT is, by the way, not part of the Ivy system.
Technically.
It's separate. So when I came to MIT, I remember coming for the visit. I remember still walking up the steps of 77 Mass 7. I saw these kids who looked completely unhealthy to me. You know, with these huge knapsacks. You
Very
know,
heavy backpacks. They wear them on both shoulders.
Yeah, and they bent over, and I was into athletics, and
Yeah.
you know, and I said, these guys look crazy.
Pasty.
I said, this whole place looks crazy, and I didn't want to go.
Ah.
And my physics teacher said, oh, no, you should go because, you know, forget about MIT. You'll like Boston. It's like the Athens of the world,
Really?
right?
Athens
So
of
that's what
America.
convinced me to come, you know, wanting to be in a city.
Okay.
So that's why I came. So it's almost very, very fortuitous
It is.
that I ended up at MIT and came. I had enough credits to graduate MIT, I think, in 2.5 years.
Oh my goodness.
But I ended up getting very, very interested in politics. I want to understand why the caste system existed. I
Right.
studied with a guy called Noam Chomsky, who many people consider
Yes.
far
Oh, yes.
lefty.
Yeah.
And I've discovered why the caste system came from. I went back and unraveled Indian history all the way back to the 8th century,
Okay.
traced it. At MIT, a lot of my students were not the Indian, my friends were not the Indian students. Those students had come from India. The higher caste Brahmins would always try to figure out my name, my last name, because you can tell your caste. So my friends at MIT were Hispanic students who came from the inner cities, black students, and poor whites. I felt more kinship with them. In those days, in 1981 at MIT,
Right.
the affirmative action programs were still being put into place.
Right.
And the students that came to MIT were actually inner city kids,
Right.
not the bourgeois, you know,
Right.
minorities that you see today. These were kids from like El Paso, Texas, or
Right.
Chicanos from East LA,
Right.
who were very disadvantaged. MIT had brought them in, and their high school systems were horrible.
Right.
So those became my friends, and I started becoming an activist because I saw the liberal hypocrisy at MIT. We started a student newspaper called The Student, and we started agitating at MIT. Our newspaper was a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, printed 2 sides, mimeographed.
Oh, wow, that's
And
interesting.
I moved to Dorchester, and a guy who was in Dorchester, who was a former librarian,
Right.
had a mimeograph machine, and we'd be there printing
Oh, like
copies,
running-
old mimeograph,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we'd get out in the morning at MIT, and we would distribute these. Our little 8.5 by 11, because of the politics, became more powerful than the student newspaper, which was like 30 pages. And
Right.
what were our politics? My politics was pretty mature at that time. I think I was 18, 19, was saying that both Democrats and Republicans are full of BS. They both represent the establishment. And the reason I'd figured this out at that early age was because there was a guy called Jesse Jackson, you may remember, was running in 1984
Sure, yep.
against Walter Mondale,
Right.
was a Democrat, Reagan was the Republican.
Right.
And here was this guy, Jesse Jackson, saying that he was against the establishment, right?
Right.
He was doing the Rainbow Coalition.
Right.
And if you remember, so we as activists were very encouraged. Wow, this is pretty cool. He's against the
Interesting, yeah. It's
establishment.
intriguing at first
Right.
blush, yeah.
But then at the last minute, if you remember, Jesse Jackson gives all of his votes to Walter Mondale,
Right.
okay?
Who he's
And
been running against.
who was running against Reagan.
Well, he was running against Mondale, but then ends up giving all his votes.
All his
to
votes,
him.
yeah.
Takes
So
the
that's when
credit.
I realized I started studying politics more deeper.
Right.
And you find out that in all political dynamics, there's always been three interesting forces.
Okay.
The establishment, people want to keep things the way they are.
Right.
The change agents, people are typically truly grassroots, out building a grassroots movement. You look at the women's movement, it wasn't done by the Democrats.
Right.
They laughed Susan B. Anthony out of the House, right? They thought it was ridiculous. She went and organized a movement. Civil rights wasn't Martin Luther King per se, it was people's names we don't know.
Right.
And it's change agents. But then there's a much more insidious element, which I call the not so obvious establishment. Some people call it social democracy. These are the people who act as though they're with these movements, but they actually are part of the establishment.
So
And they're
like a wolf
very
in sheep's
insidious.
clothing then,
They're
essentially.
wolves in sheep's clothing. So,
Okay.
that's why. We hit upon that, which was a gold mine of truth. That if you start looking at where change comes from,
Yeah.
it's never come from the establishment or the not so obvious establishment.
Right.
It's always come from people
That
on the
third rail.
streets.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in the last election, for example, that's why I never voted at all, and I'm proud of that. But when Trump ran was the first time I voted ever in my life, because
Wow. Okay.
yeah. So I have a very pure voting record, unlike, these guys who,
So
one
what drew
guy,
you to Trump? What drew us to?
well, he was anti-establishment, truly anti-establishment. And so in my view, here was Hillary Clinton, clearly the establishment candidate.
Oh, for certain, yes.
Look, she had Romney, the Clintons, the Bushes, and the Obamas, right?
And Department of Justice and FBI.
Everyone. So you had this person who was a clearly the establishment candidate.
Machine.
And over here, where the everyday working people were tired of this nonsense. But remember, who was a not so obvious, the really insidious evil part of this? I put the not so obvious establishment, even more evil than the establishment, was Bernie Sanders. Here Bernie Sanders runs, and a lot of my friends call me up, Shiva, you should vote for Bernie. I said, he's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did.
Is push his vote.
He's going to give all of his votes to Walter Mondale. And the not so obvious establishment exists, and it exists on both sides,
Right.
on the left and the right. Right now in Massachusetts, but anyway, with Bernie Sanders, the goal was to take all the energy off the people who were really upset, and Bernie was using the words revolution, hope, change. They always have these very interesting rhetoric.
Yeah.
But the goal is to suck it back into the establishment and say, you know what, we have to choose a lesser of two evils. This is what the not so obvious establishment is clever at.
Right.
And here was Trump, who was truly the agent of change. And he was not part of any of these groups. And the reason I knew that was he was attacking the media. When you attack the media on a national platform, that's what got me excited about him. And the fact that he was attacking both parties. So I said, forget Donald Trump, because I don't know him as a person,
Right.
but what he was doing was historic. And that's why I decided to vote for him. Now, in Massachusetts, you have the same phenomenon. I'll tell you what's going on right now, the same thing. All the people who voted for Donald Trump were not Republicans, sorry to say,
Yeah.
They were, 80% of them were independents. You had Charlie Baker, whatever he is, he calls himself a Republican, but he essentially told people not to vote for Trump. And so what's happened right now in Massachusetts, 2 million people voted for Hillary. The 1 million that voted for Trump, 80% were independents. Only 20% of them
Republican
were
Party.
Republicans. So now what the establishment is trying to do, Massachusetts is known for innovation, right? But they are trying to innovate.
Technologically, yes.
But they also are trying to innovate this concept of a fake Trumper. And one guy we have out there photoshopped a picture with Trump. He's got his campaign manager who's a Saudi lobbyist. He endorses Baker before he doesn't. So what they want to do is suck all the energy out of the two true anti-establishment Trumpers and bring it back into
Behind
Baker
that
Baker.
candidate. Okay.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. And that's, you have, that's what this guy, we call him Dirty Deal, And he's the insidious equivalent of Bernie Sanders.
I do want to get into that, but I
Yeah.
wonder if we could just go back a little bit more to your background. So I know you have some business experience,
Definitely.
expertise, and something to share there as well.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, so you could bucket my expertise as in political history and as an activist. The other is I'm an inventor and a scientist. I've had to solve problems all my life. I've been doing that since I was 14. Email was actually solving an office problem,
Right.
and it wasn't done by the military-industrial complex. People don't like to hear that.
Unlike Al Gore, you actually have a genuine patent.
Yeah, Al Gore doesn't do anything. I mean, this guy's a complete liar. I don't know what he does. I don't know what he's trained in, but I actually have 4 degrees from MIT.
Right.
Have put in the time, didn't lie to get those, get into MIT. unlike Elizabeth Warren, who lied on her application. But I've been in and out of MIT, but I was always starting businesses.
Okay.
Academia was something that enabled me to get into certain areas, but I always go start a business. So when after I finished my undergraduate in electrical engineering, I then was one of the early engineers in a company that was a predecessor to PowerPoint. You may know this company called Lotus.
Yeah.
We did Freelance, which was a graphic piece for Lotus. I was one of the senior engineers, and that company then got bought by Lotus and then IBM.
Okay.
And then I came back to MIT and did my master's in mechanical engineering, and then also at the Media Lab in design. I worked with Muriel Cooper, is known as a grand dame of design. I would have been an artist if I didn't grow up in an engineering family.
Interesting. Okay.
Wow.
So I still do all of our graphic design for our campaign. You know, we don't use others. It's I'll take.
Well, you must like your own work. I hope
do.
so.
I do love my own work. We do the meme, you know, the fake Indian, real Indian. That comes right from us. But anyway, I did that, and in the middle of doing that work, I started a company one of the early companies to put artists on a lot of my friends were artists, called Arts Online, out of a company called Millennium Productions.
Interesting.
And then we put Boston Ballet, all these, I mean, this is in 1992, 1993. We used to give seminars telling people WWW is going to be big. Everyone's going to have a website. People would look at us with their eyes crossed. I used to give lectures to a room of people where only 2 out of 1,000 people would have an email address. Because remember, email didn't become a consumer application until after 92, 93. It was basically a business application.
AOL, yeah.
Think about it. It was a business application, and you don't need the @ any of that. So we started that company, and then while I was doing that, I was at MIT doing my research in artificial intelligence, and I won a competition to analyze President Clinton's email. In 93, email volume starts growing for the Clinton White House, right? Because, you know, Yahoo, Hotmail was coming. And they were getting 5,000 emails a day. It was doubling, and the White House runs a competition to see are there artificial intelligence technologies which should read the email and automatically bucket it. Because the way they were doing it was they had 147 categories for their physical letters. When an email came in, they would print it out, and then they would bucket it into one of these 147 categories, and they'd write back a form letter. And they had interns doing this. And probably shouldn't use the word interns with Clinton, but that's what.
A room full of interns.
Yeah,
both genders.
A room full of interns, right. But anyway, so they were looking for technologies to automatically categorize. I was a graduate student. There were 6 other public companies. I ended up winning that competition and left MIT. My lawyer said, Shiva, you can always do your PhD. And do you remember 93 is when the internet was taking off?
Right, yeah.
So I leave MIT, much to the chagrin of my parents, because it was
they
a big
must have been
thing.
heartbroken. They're like, get that 3rd degree.
Yeah, well, it was a 4th degree, my PhD, right? So I leave, and I start this company called EchoMail. Is my 3rd company, which would automatically read an email, and we could analyze it, and completely bootstrap that company. We went and negotiated with the mayor of Cambridge, and he gave us a small space in the Arts Center. For the Arts Center, we built their website. I wrote a book. In the back of the book, I gave a company called MCI Advertising. They gave us free internet. The whole thing was bootstrapped.
Okay, wow, okay.
Pure, we didn't take any VC funding.
Right.
And then EchoMail starts taking off. We start getting AT&T as our first customer, then Nike and Citigroup. Built it to a multi-million-dollar company, about $250 million in value.
Right.
Not one venture capital funding at all. Okay,
Wow.
I made a ton of money doing that. And then was walking back to MIT one day, and my advisor at MIT said, Shiva, you should come back and finish your PhD. And this new field was coming called systems biology, which is could you understand the body as a system, which is what my grandmother was doing, right, in India.
And many moons
but this
ago,
was
right.
about, what happened was a genome project that just ended, if you remember, in 2003. We realized that we have the same number of genes as a worm. We have around 20,000 genes. We don't have 100,000 genes. So what makes a human being actually different than a worm is the molecular reactions that take place. So the goal was, could you mathematically model the human cell? And so I came back to MIT, did my PhD 5 years in that, took time off, and created this very powerful technology called CytoSolve, which is used, we can mathematically model cancer on the computer. And we in fact used it to test a combination of drugs, and we discovered a dual combination therapy that we got allowed by the FDA.
How long did that take?
We did that in 11 months. So we have so when people talk about we got to fight healthcare, none of these guys, Obama particularly doesn't know what healthcare is really about. None of the politicians do. We actually have to lower the cost, and that's going to come through innovation. It's not going to come by the big insurance companies. It's not going to come from the big hospitals. It's
Or
not-
yet another merger.
Another merger, yeah.
Partners Healthcare becomes
so my point is I did many things beyond the invention of email. Cytosolve is on its road to become a very large multi-billion dollar company. In parallel, I have another institute I've started called Systems Health, where we retrain MDs, yoga teachers on integrating Eastern and Western medicine.
Oh, interesting.
And then I have a small nonprofit called Innovation Corps, where we select 3 to 8 students each year, age 14 through 18. And we give them a little bit of money, recognize them if they need mentorship, so they can also innovate, like I did back when I was
So you're trying to,
14.
there's 4 to 8 people, you're mini
That's
Shivas.
great.
Well, the goal is there's a
An
lot of
idea.
smart kids that are
Sure.
in the 14 through 18 year old, and they don't all go to MIT. They're all over the world.
Wonderful.
If we move on a little bit from the businesses, what made you want to run for U.S. Senate?
It's a good question. For me, it was a natural outgrowth of being a political activist. If you look at, there's this one aspect of me as an, inventor scientist and as an entrepreneur, writing papers as an inventor scientist, publishing, entrepreneur, starting companies. But the other thing has always been there is this activist or fighter for people. Not only from MIT, when I got my graduate degree, at MIT, my PhD, you'll see I held up this huge poster which said U.S. out of Iraq as I was getting my PhD. Half the crowd booed me and the other half gave me a standing ovation. Remember, this was at a time it was not popular to say anything against Iraq. And I said U.S. out of Iraq. More recent, then after that, I used the technology I created for modeling the cell to actually expose Monsanto, as you may know, is one of the most is a huge company which has poisoned essentially the food supply in this country. They're a big herbicide creator of glyphosate, Roundup.
Roundup.
They're the ones who created with Dow, Agent Orange, which destroyed not only the Vietnamese foliage, but also a lot of our veterans.
Otherwise known as genetically modified food. They're
Genetically
also
modified
creating-
food, yeah. So Monsanto,
They're one of the few. That
yeah. So Monsanto created pesticides, which kill weeds, right?
Right.
But they also started killing the crops, and then they created their own genetically modified version of
withstand-
crops to withstand them. So they
Roundup
own
and
both
the other.
sides. So if you talk to farmers out in the Midwest, et cetera, Monsanto, now part of Bayer, because they've been hit so hard because of work like mine and other activists,
Right.
they put themselves under Bayer, under
Rebranded,
children's, to hide their bad brand. But so that I published a series of papers in 2014, 15, and then about several years ago, a lot of my work went into the Smithsonian. I never wanted credit for the invention of email. When my mom was dying several years ago, in a suitcase she left all the artifacts that went into the Smithsonian, and it created this very interesting, unfortunate controversy where people, when the day it went into the Smithsonian, you had the people from the military industrial academic complex, a lot of liberals who could not believe that a dark-skinned American kid in Newark invented email. You see, that throws a wrench into their narrative that you have to go to big institutions to create great things.
Okay.
Right? So when that happened, Gawker Media wrote this article calling me a fraud and all sorts of 4-letter words. Horrible names, trying to defame me. Here, I've got 4 degrees from MIT, started companies overnight. You have this company trying to basically, yes, we have the First
Yes, we
Amendment.
do,
Yeah, but the First Amendment does not allow you to defame and libel someone.
Right.
It's not even about the invention of email. Fraud is a criminal term, right?
Right.
So I saw that thing moved me to realize that in America we have a caste system. You see, as long as I was part of MIT, I was on the front page of MIT for many things while I was there.
Right.
Inventing EchoMail, getting my Fulbright. But when the stuff went into the Smithsonian and the facts came out that it was like a new skull was found in Africa, that it
Right.
reset the origin of history.
Yeah, right.
That the fact is
Mankind or
email wasn't
whatever.
done by the military industrial complex. That's a lie. Because for far too long in American history, we've been brainwashed to think we fund the military and we get Velcro and Tang, which, by the way, didn't come out of the military. Right?
Right. Basically, there's basically peacetime aspects to like the war machine and what was
Right.
created.
Yeah.
during-
What they try to do is they try to say, "Oh, fund war and be happy that you get email." Well,
Or the Jeep.
yeah. Or
Okay.
email didn't come out of the military. It came from a 14-year-old kid solving an office problem, a civilian problem. By the way, a 14-year-old kid invented TV. So this is the deeper thing that got me motivated, because when you peel away the layers,
Okay.
there is a concept of a deep state. There is a concept of elites. The caste system. My parents left the caste system in India, but I can tell you, to everyone listening, we have a caste system in this country. And it's unfortunate. And the epicenter of that is Harvard University. You know, and you can look at the 1 mile distance between MIT and Harvard. That is the epicenter of the deep state. And that's a insight very few people can talk about. And I can talk about that as a scientist, as an inventor, as an activist. So when you ask me what motivates me to want to run, I think that is one of the most destructive things to America, because it's a set of elites like Elizabeth Warren, like Charlie Baker, like Mitt Romney, Republican and Democrat establishment, that they think they know better. When the truth is, I know you know better. Everyday people, from the time you got up, Larry, or you got up, Joan,
Right.
you made 100 decisions for yourself without the state being involved. These people think that they know better. Like they know better where innovation comes from, right? You must go to MIT and get branded. Now the problem they have with me is I got all their 4 degrees, but email wasn't invented by MIT.
Right.
Or it was done in Newark, New Jersey. And there's many innovations. There's a lot of smart people in this country. And what these people have done, when I say these people, I can tell you exactly where they are.
Right.
You know, I can tell you the latitude and longitude. It's not theory to me. And that set of elites, like Elizabeth Warren, believe that they can control narratives. And this is very destructive to this country. And what they've done is on anything you take, they're the ones who draw the little bounds, and then they bound the discussion within that.
Right.
And then if you go out of those bounds, they start calling you all sorts of names and labeling you.
Right.
And, you know, we were discussing earlier before the show started about racism. You know,
Right.
a bunch of people, white liberals at Harvard University, and some of you listening, you should listen carefully, because
Pay
you don't own the narrative on racism. They've said, don't use the N-word, right? And, you know, whether you use a Confederate flag or not, you know, and you change Yawkey Way, now you've bounded racism. That's, to them, if you do all that, we've solved racism.
You exonerate yourself. You almost absolve yourself
Exactly.
of sin.
And the reality is, I can tell you as a dark-skinned Indian guy who's been called all sorts of names, right, that you don't know what racism is. They don't. These people are, in fact, the racists. They've drawn the bounds, and they want to keep people on a plantation.
Right.
So, for example, I go to the, you know, free speech rally,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
right? I put a headdress on Elizabeth Warren's head, right, with a meme next to me and her, and I call her a fake Indian. I don't back down from the invention of email, right? So I'm called a fraud, I'm called a white nationalist, I'm called a Nazi. You see how they work? These people are absolutely the
They didn't
racists.
call Al Gore a fraud.
Exactly. They
has
gave him a
that
Nobel.
patent.
I think they gave him a Nobel Prize, right?
Right.
Right, because he fits their narrative. So what I
Correct.
want to tell everyone is Elizabeth Warren is the racist. Harvard University is the architect of modern racism in this country. Just look, 3 miles from Elizabeth Warren's house, Boston. The average net worth of a black person in Boston is $8. $8 by the Federal Reserve, okay? So what are you talking about? And what is the average net worth of a poor white person in this country? No one talks about that. No one talks about the fact that their infant mortality is exploding, higher than any other country, right? So what we've done is you have racists like Howie Carr, who uses the poor working class to point the picture at minorities, blacks. You have the Boston Globe, who, by the way, put the 3 pictures of the 3 white candidates, left my picture out when I was the first one to run, who's also racist, because they want to control who is considered a good liberal.
The narrative.
Right. And they point the finger at poor whites. And I can see this clearly. So what we have is race war in this country, perpetrated by these. Howie Carr sells books, right? And these people have the right to call people white supremacists. These people can say someone's a wife beater, right? A dark-skinned guy beats white women.
Right.
You see how they do this? And that's what we have in this country. We have the Republicans and Democrat establishment, you know, run and split and divide this country by race. But when we're out on the road out there, you ask me why I ran?
Yeah.
Because I grew up with poor villagers in India, but I grew up with everyday working class people in New Jersey. You know, I learned how to paint, I learned how to landscape from hard-working Americans. My mentors, my school teachers, my coaches. So I know, you know, I'm a worker. I consider myself a high-tech worker. I still work. I get up at 4 and I go to bed at 12 solving problems. And I am really angry and very upset, and so are a lot of Americans, blacks and whites, against what they see in this 2-party system. And we have an opportunity with my running to declare our independence. And, you know, I've always done the impossible. My parents did the impossible. People said inventing email was the impossible. But I want to ask everyone out there that you have the chance to break your chains from this two-party system.
Right.
They do not deserve the American working people anymore.
They haven't
because
earned it.
They haven't earned it. And what's really insidious is this. This is how they operate, is that the 0.1%, you know, who think they work by moving money from one bank account to another, right? That's how they consider that work, make a lot of money, living off other people's labor. Those people also incent another group of people not to work, okay? Welfare, right? Don't work hard, free stuff.
Right.
So working people are being sandwiched by two sets of leeches. That's what's actually going on. There's a reason that gangs don't, you know, we don't go after MS-13. There's a reason that we have illegal immigration. There's a reason that these people are armed, because my view is that the enemies of the working people are both these people at the extremes.
Right.
And so this is, in my view, very, very well architected. So the people at the 0.1% who frankly don't work a lot want to incent other people not to work because they're their protection in some ways. And the
Almost
everyday,
the buffer because they squeeze
exactly, they're squeezing the everyday worker. And what we need is to recognize that it's not a leader that's going to change this country. It's not going to be a party. It's going to be everyone recognizing it's their fight. You know, people recognizing that they should declare their independence.
People waking up, basically.
People waking up
as
and
opposed to
recognizing
somebody
it.
telling them.
Yeah, we determine our destiny like my parents did. You know, they told us, you know, if you were a janitor in the Indian caste system, you're going to be a janitor and your sons are going to be janitors. Or if you're in a, but that's not what this country is about.
No, you can
But-
be self-made if you educate yourself.
Exactly.
You epitomize that.
So, Doctor, let me
Well,
ask
that's what America is supposed to be about.
Right.
And and I think the Trump victory, whether people like it or not, was an important and necessary disruption. Because what it's done, it's opened up a window in history for people like me to run. And that's the opportunity people have. Not to vote for me, but to stand up for themselves. That's what they have the opportunity. And that's why I'm running as an independent. That's why we dumped the Republican Party. You know, we gave them a shot. I used to get standing ovations. You guys can see it at Cape Cod.
Right.
You know, but the Republican Party, you know, they have 3 sets of people that they want to run. Baker has a deal with Dirty Deal, you know? So it's all an insider's game. That's not American. These people are not American, and I think people are tired of that.
I think that would just take a little bit more of a discussion to say what you meant by dirty deal. But if we could just go on, when you get to Washington,
Yeah.
what will you be doing to change the issue that you've just addressed, just talked about?
What, about Dirty Deal?
No, no. About the caste system that we have in this country, about
Or
the
racism.
racism that we have
Well,
in this
first,
country
yeah.
that we don't even recognize.
Yeah, so it's a great
What's your
question.
first priority, Dr.
Look,
Shiva, when you get to
first
Washington?
priority is the founders of this country never wanted career politicians. That's why they never enumerated it in the Constitution, because they all had jobs. Washington was a surveyor. He ran a farm business. You know, they never
Everybody
thought
had to get back to their
they
business.
never someone wanted to be so dirty and just want to run for politics all day. That wasn't a career. It was a service. So number one, term limits. You know,
Okay.
I think, and term limits and putting in procedure that when I say term limits, I'm talking about also for all these lobbyists. You know, what Trump is trying to do now is there's 10,000, 20,000 functionaries in the government who are there whether who gets elected or not. There's a whole civil service infestation in there. So
Right.
forget which president comes and goes.
It doesn't
And he's
matter.
trying to bust that up. So you need to go after that. The second thing we need to do is, you know, when you look at healthcare, I know what healthcare is about. I mean, I've studied it. You know, the biggest thing you have to understand healthcare is that it's not about single payer or non-single payer.
Right.
The fundamental thing with healthcare is you have to lower the cost.
Right.
I mean, you have to, and we're selling a 50 cents hamburger for $500,000. That's literally what's going on. And,
Right.
and if people understood that the big insurance companies, the big hospitals and big
Right.
pharma, that triangle
Right.
actually wants to keep costs high because they want you to pay higher premiums.
Right.
You know, 10% increase in premiums, companies are making billions, right? Insurance companies had record profits last year.
Sure.
So that collusion occurs to make sure drug prices are kept way high.
Right.
And I'll tell you one concrete thing. There's people called GPOs, group purchasing organizations. Starting in 1990, they started getting kickbacks. Meaning, to put it simply, if here's the drug manufacturer
Okay.
and here's where you get your drug,
Right.
between them to here, the GPOs are the middlemen who write these contracts.
Right.
And they're allowed to give kickbacks to hospital administrators, vacations, etc.
Okay.
It's legalized corruption. And that
So
raises
if a medical doctor and a hospital writes X amount of prescriptions for, say,
they have
Valium,
all
something
different things,
antiquated.
and those
Yeah.
contracts are so opaque, but it's close to $500 billion.
Wow.
Okay? Those need to be made completely illegal and shut down. That's the first bill.
would you
Elizabeth
do-
Warren
would you
knows
do
about
that?
this, and she has not done anything about it. None of these guys have done anything about it. But
Right.
that's the first thing that has to be done. How did I learn about it? Because I actually talked to doctors.
And they're frustrated. Yeah.
They're frustrated. If you go to hospitals right now, many hospitals, or a number of hospitals, are finding it hard to even get saline. Okay? There are
Salt fire.
standard drugs which are, you can't even, these GPOs control the flow. So if you don't want to play with them, they'll shut you down your supply.
Wow.
So the insidious nature of the GPOs, very few people, it's not even
It's
discussed
like
in
a
the
naval
news.
blockade 200 years ago. It's like a naval
Exactly.
blockade
So
200 years
those,
ago.
so those need to be shut down. We need to really take the NIH, the National Institute of Health.
Health, right.
The whole way NIH and how funding occurs for science is completely corrupt, because you have big academic organizations,
Right.
the big journals where science is so-called created or made,
Right.
and the NIH. Well, the NIH, if you're a young researcher at a small state university, you apply for funding,
Right.
well, it's probably very unlikely you're going to even get it because you're not part of that clique.
Right.
So 70% of the NIH funding for so-called new innovative research goes to Harvard, goes to MIT, et cetera. It doesn't go to innovative research.
Right.
So we don't really have medical innovation taking place.
Right.
So we need to take the NIH, and my views, at least 25%, 30% of the funding needs to go to alternative research. There's amazing herbs. There's amazing new alternative medicine that have been used for thousands of years.
Right.
I'm not talking about woo-woo stuff. I'm
Right.
talking about actual stuff that needs to be researched, you know? So why aren't we funding prevention? Organic farms, local farms. We need to incent young people to go into farming. The average age of a farmer now is 62 years old.
Right. They're dying out.
They're dying out. We need to have more vo-tech schools. It's one, MIT is basically a vo-tech school. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I still know how to program software. I know how to fix an engine. I can always have a job, right? Politicians can't. We need to have more vo-tech schools. You want to solve racism? Let's start putting 2, 3, 4 vo-tech schools in every inner city and get people, plumbers, electricians, software
Or it's
engineers.
impossible to find a good plumber. It's one of those things for everybody who's a
The-
doctor and lawyer. Like, I picked the wrong profession.
The average, I don't know if you know, for every 17 high-tech job openings in Massachusetts, only one person is skilled.
Wow.
So think about that. So what have all these politicians been doing?
And Massachusetts, I mean, there's more than 200 colleges and universities
Exactly.
in
So
Massachusetts.
what are they creating?
Academics is our product.
Right, so what we're
as a
creating is
state.
we're creating kids
yet-
who have massive debt.
Yes.
They,
them.
they're unbridled with debt, and they have no skills. So, and if you really look at Massachusetts overall, we're known as the worst in public integrity, which means really high in corruption. One of the worst public infrastructures, highways, et cetera,
Right.
and 3 times the national average in opioid addiction. This is what the quote-unquote swamp of politicians have delivered. And they don't, by the way, want to solve opioids. There's a solution that's already out there. We have a guy, Dr. Kishore, on our staff who actually helped 250,000 people, with an in-home detox solution, a holistic approach, and Martha Coakley put him in jail. Okay?
Oh my goodness.
So
Prior
these
Attorney
people do
General.
not want to solve opioids. Mitt Romney, I don't know what words to describe him that you won't be able to broadcast, but this guy he used Bain Capital to aggregate the methadone clinics and flipped them and made another $750 million. Okay? So they don't want to solve opioids. It's a swamp economy. And so when you ask me what I'm going to do in Washington, first, no one talks about this. No one is on the bully pulpit. Elizabeth Warren's just talking about, in name only, I'm going to fight for you. She doesn't bring up any of these issues.
No.
She's at Harvard, which is the biggest hedge fund. She has never, ever exposed Harvard. She's taken millions from Harvard. So you're going to look at someone who's going to use that pulpit, the value of what a representation means, and talk about these issues on a national level.
Represent populist views.
Right,
but
and
she
I
really
think
doesn't.
I think that's one of the most important things to do. When I talk about policy, I'm going to come from a standpoint, Larry, that I actually understand healthcare. I understand how medicine's created. I understand civil engineering. I understand infrastructure, right? And many of these problems need to be the people need to be made aware that there are solutions,
Right.
and that these people actually don't want to solve them.
Would you repeal the Monsanto Protection Act?
Definitely. So For people who don't know what that is,
Yeah,
you
to
know,
educate people.
yeah. So in a appropriations bill, they stuck in this thing, which has been known as the Monsanto Protection Act. Basically, Monsanto, this chemical company which creates Roundup, et cetera, created
Right.
Agent Orange with Dow. If, let's say, the three of us find in our neighborhood, in Burlington, for example, that Monsanto's chemicals are hurting our children,
Okay.
and we file a lawsuit and we win in federal court,
Wow, lucky us.
and let's say the federal judges put an injunction on Monsanto.
Not
the
to use the
mon-
chemicals in the town of Burlington
Exactly.
henceforth.
The
Okay.
that federal court ruling can be overruled by the executive branch. Overruled. Now this is unprecedented.
That's true, because it would normally go through the appellate process.
Exactly.
The First Circuit Court of Appeals, and maybe
Exactly.
up on okay.
So that's what Elizabeth Warren
Right.
voted yay on, and everyone, and no one, if you don't believe this, just go look at Elizabeth Warren's vote on the Monsanto Protection Act. So here's a woman claiming she wants to help working people, but she basically voted to allow a company to poison us, and so we could, as citizens, not really take them through the proper appellate process.
Right.
That's what Elizabeth Warren did. She also voted against Bernie's GMO labeling bill. You're talking, Elizabeth Warren is fundamentally part of the not so obvious establishment.
Right.
She's perfect for them, right?
Yeah.
Uses all the language, has the shtick, right?
Oh, she
and
has
that's
the
why
shtick.
that's why we believe she needs to be viscerally, in every way, completely disrespected. She needs to be disrespected because these
You've
people.
probably gotten some flack on the campaign trail.
Well, no, we don't. We
about
don't. People,
attacking Elizabeth Warren, but
90% of people like it. It's a vocal minority of people.
okay.
And what's interesting is they all sort of behave the same, and they call me a racist, and they're typically white liberals. It's amazing. And then I call them a racist, and they don't know what to say. I said, you're trying to tell me I'm a racist? You're the one who's a racist because you've bounded racism into a very small
And
definition.
you're prejudging me.
Yes.
Right.
Well, not only that,
Yeah.
you don't even know what racism is. Your reaction to me is racist.
Right.
And
Inherently.
when she, takes a DNA test and she's willing to return her money to Harvard, then we will take the headdress off her. But this is not, in fact, about race. It's about integrity. So they
Actually,
want to make it about race, but it's really about integrity. It's about someone who lied, took a minority's job. That's what this is about. That's racism.
She used affirmative action.
It's racism. She's a racist.
So-
Racist Elizabeth Warren. That's what we should really call her.
If we could talk a little bit more about healthcare.
Yeah.
You'd be more open to these alternative type medicines, the herbs and other type of food type medicines.
Well, let me tell you.
And how about things like alternative medicines, like spiritual type healings?
Well, yes. So what I believe is, I've studied this very carefully, for years. It's been one of my life's endeavors since a child. There's two forms of medicine that exist.
Okay.
The modern system of healthcare that we have today, Larry and Joan, came out of wartime medicine around the 1800s. Florence Nightingale, by the way, wasn't just a nurse. She actually was the mother of modern medicine. She was recognized that soldiers in the Crimean War were not dying on the field, but when they came to the hospitals because they didn't have proper care. She designed, exactly. But the goal was to put a soldier back on the field. So we developed a whole system of medicine to quote unquote put the soldier back on the field. Crisis management medicine. So that type of medicine is phenomenal. You get God forbid you get your hand blown off. We can do microsurgery.
Right.
All of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
That is very different than this other form of medicine, which was created in traditional systems of medicine, where they observed, it was about health, it was about food, it was how you mixed foods, it was when you ate. I mean, it's a whole way of living in harmony with nature.
Right.
That's what I call the Eastern or traditional system of medicine.
Preventative.
Preventive, but both are needed. God forbid you have a major accident,
Right.
you definitely need this.
Right.
But what we've done is, remember, this is like the military medicine.
Right.
What we've done is we've
Passion puts you back on the field.
exactly, but we've told everyone this system of medicine is what we all should be using. You follow what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like we're basically taking a bazooka to hit a hammer.
Right.
Okay?
Or a fly.
I think
or a
it's
fly.
a little worse than that because this is the only acceptable form of medicine.
That's the only acceptable.
Have.
That
Exactly.
your insurance company will reimburse you for.
You need your drugs.
You need your drug. Yeah. So the racket is that big insurance makes money from keeping costs high because the way it works now is, why do you get insurance? Why do we all have insurance? Oh my God! If something happens, I'm going to be hit with a huge bill.
Decimate my family. It could be a
Right. So why is it going to wipe
7-digit,
you out? Because the costs are way too high.
Right.
But suppose over here we start educating people about how to eat. That organic food does. 80% of Americans want organic food.
Right.
You know, that's the facts. It's not a left or right issue anymore.
And they even changed the definition of GMO foods, genetically modified foods. They're, you know, the FDA has come up with their own definition.
Right,
that
right,
USDA.
right. So what's fundamentally happening is the people out there, everyday people, want. I mean, what mother wants to poison their children? It's so fundamental,
Nobody wakes up in the
right?
morning and says,
Who
"I'll
wants to
poison my
poison
children."
themselves?
They poison themselves.
Right.
So here you have a company, Monsanto, which has made its mark by, you know, Agent Orange,
Right.
and now poisoning, and Elizabeth Warren supported them, right? Think about that. How can this woman claim, any Democrat liberal, quote unquote, listening to this,
Right.
you know, this is where they start
Should be
blowing
incensed. They
should be incensed. And that's why our campaign, they blow a chip in their brain, because things don't compute for them, because they live in these little, unfortunate little boxes. So when you ask about healthcare, you know, we need to go back to the fundamentals, which is, you know, let thy food be thy medicine.
Right.
It starts with that. Now, you won't find any of these politicians talking about this.
It's not profitable.
It's not profitable, but I will, and I think that the reality is, from an economic standpoint, it's a huge opportunity. Food is a $4.7 trillion business.
Sure.
Technology business is 400 billion. So it's a 10 times more business. Anyone listening, you want to make good money, go start an organic farm. 30%, 40% growth. We don't have enough organic products, right? Okay. So it's one of the most explosively growing opportunities,
Right.
and yet it's not even considered in the healthcare, quote unquote, Affordable Health Care Act. It's complete nonsense. The Affordable Health Care Act was designed to make big hospitals bigger, big pharma bigger, and big insurance bigger, and destroy the local practitioner. Health, in many ways, is not only the herbs and, you know, whatever, but it's the one-on-one that you get with the practitioner
Right.
and the patient. It's a dual process. It's not top down.
It's dialogue.
And we've lost 250,000 family practitioners over the last, you know, 20 years.
They're just frustrated.
They have to go join big hospitals. They can't run their because of the regulations, et cetera. So we've destroyed health in this country.
So how do we bring it back?
The
How do we bring back healthcare?
Well, the number one way we bring it back is we need to have representatives who talk about what I just talked about at a national
Yeah,
level.
you're the first person I've heard talk
Yeah,
about
no
this.
no one is talking about where's the bill sponsored in Congress to basically completely, you know, put together a series of incentives to get people farming, local farms. You know, where's a bill to ensure that the NIH spends, you know, 30, 40% of his budget on researching, you know,
Right.
I mean, you take an herb like turmeric, right?
Right.
Turmeric, okay.
Turmeric,
Yeah.
you know, powerful herb, you know?
Right.
You know, it's in India, curry, which has turmeric, a set of spices,
Right.
it was basically out of thousands of years is included in every food.
Right.
That's why Indians experience 1/3 less liver cancer, okay? Nature produces amazing products already, right?
Right.
That's called food. Over here, we create synthetic drugs. I'm not saying you don't need them. You need them at certain points,
At certain
but
points.
food is ultimately medicine.
Right.
And if we started driving our healthcare policy from that operating system versus a pharma operating system,
Right.
we're going to create a healthier country.
Right.
But you need to have intelligent people who have some sense talking about this, not people who are represented by big pharma.
We're not talking about the elite type of,
We're talking about
Informative.
yeah, I mean, you know,
You're
every
fighting
day.
a fight on many fronts. I mean,
Well, no, the singular fight is actually the enemy is actually very simple if you look at it.
Yeah.
If you look at the epicenter of it, you know, I just wrote an article called "Take Back Harvard," and it basically says, look, Harvard is the epicenter, the alpha and the omega of the deep state. Think about what Harvard University represents,
they
okay?
have more money than God.
They have more, but if you look at their history in the 1640s, Harvard was going to go out of business. I don't know if you know this.
No, I don't.
They had a financial crisis. And what they did was they said they were going to start an Indian college. I mean, this is like almost deja vu of how they used the Native Americans. So they got funding from a Christian organization to create the second brick building at Harvard. They called it Indian College. And basically that was what got them out of their fiscal woes. But the idea was they were going to educate thousands of Native Americans in Christianity. They only educated
convert them.
5 of them.
Essentially. Okay.
And they used that building for Harvard's printing press and to educate a lot of white kids. Doesn't it sound similar to what Elizabeth Warren did? What I'm trying to say is Harvard University puts so much of its effort into its branding, But
Oh,
it
yeah.
is where the deep state gets trained. John F. Kennedy School of Government is where the CIA, all these guys get trained. And they have a collusion. You have Harvard Medical School, Harvard Business School, you know, John F. Kennedy School of Government. 30% of the admissions is legacy admissions, right? I don't know how Charlie Baker really got in there. You know, his father went there. You know, seriously. I mean, how do these people get, do they really?
You're not a legacy.
I'm not legacy, but I'm
yeah.
saying that's how Harvard runs on. So if you look at that entire epicenter,
Yeah.
you know, you can point to the fact that we have a Brahmin intellectual elite in this country that the deep state, and I think they need to be destroyed in a very fundamental way, because they're the ones who are creating all these narratives and creating race war.
If I could just summarize, it seems like whether the answer to racism or to the medical crisis we have.
You can point it right at
healthcare
Harvard
crisis.
University.
Okay.
I'm telling you, you can point, I can give you a longitude and a latitude
That may have been
for
where it
this.
started, but it sounds like the answer to these issues is all awakening and becoming aware of what the truth is and what's really happening.
Exactly. I think you hit
to
it on
all
the
us,
head.
what's being done to us.
Yeah, I think,
As
you know,
opposed
one
to
of,
something legislative.
yeah, I think,
And I just want to make sure, could we get up Dr. Shiva's website so they can go to and see some of these articles that were talked about?
yeah, if you go to shivaforsenate.com, we have a blog page there. I
Okay.
write the articles.
Hopefully they'll post it up. There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay, yeah,
Thank
this
you.
website and at least the address.
If you guys go to Shiva for Senate, you know, our goal, I think you hit it on the head, Larry. I like your name, Way, right? One of the slogans I had was, you know, which know the truth, be the light, and find your way. And what that really means is we have an incredible opportunity with all the chaos going on, what people think. You know, the Renaissance took place where there were plagues and chaos. It's a
Right.
greatest opportunity for change.
Right.
And that's
It's a
what we
motivator.
have.
And I think even if people just go to your website and start reading some of these articles that you've talked about, I think that'll be a tremendous amount of light and
Definitely.
and understanding that people will be
Yeah.
able to get, be able to start that change.
Yeah, I mean, look, the founders of this country were very, very deeply spiritual people.
Right.
They were deeply practical people, deeply skilled people,
Right.
and people really cared about service.
Right.
I mean, these people risked their lives.
Right.
None of these politicians risked their lives. I risked my life when I went onto the Parkman Bandstand. It was 40 of us and the Boston police against 40,000 people. None of these politicians will risk their lives. I have risked my lives and will risk my life for this country.
I watched that Boston Common
Yeah.
event, and it was very sad because you were stating what everybody there in that crowd should have been supporting. And all you had was people protesting, yelling, getting violent. If I could ask you just about a current movement, that would be the walkaway movement. What would your reaction to that movement be?
Well, look, the walkaway movement, it's a good thing to walk away, but we need to walk away from both political parties because the walkaway movement is being said walk away from the Democrats.
Right.
We need to walk away from the Democrats and the Republicans.
Right.
Both of these party machineries will keep people in bondage, and we don't want I'm saying we want to get off the pendulum. Okay.
Swinging back and
Yeah,
forth
we don't
between
want to be off
Democratic
the
and
pendulum. We don't want to
Republican
play their
parties.
games anymore. We don't want to be on a seesaw. Let them have their playground because we can never win. We should walk away from both political parties. And it's time for people to recognize that independence, we can win because Massachusetts, it's 56, 58% independence.
Yeah,
And independents typically vote Republican or Democrat because they've engineered, brainwashed people, bullied people into thinking that you have to choose a lesser of two evils.
That is always the pitch, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Last 15
you
years.
can never win as an independent, but I'll tell you that I can win as an independent, and I'm the only one, by the way, who can defeat Elizabeth Warren, and I say that with all humility, and that's why the mainstream media is so afraid to even cover us, because they know if it's toe-to-toe between me and Warren,
Have you asked for a debate with her?
we have. We
And
have.
the answer has been-
But she's.
I
wait
think we have
for
about
voting?
20 seconds left.
I think the bottom line is only a real Indian can defeat the fake Indian.
Okay.
And when I say that, and I'll say it over and over and over again, that's why everyone loves our slogan, is because only a real Indian can defeat a fake Indian, because you're looking at someone who's a real American and who really loves this country. And Elizabeth Warren does not love this country. She loves herself and the elite group that she represents.
We'd like to have
Thank
you
you.
back
Sure.
because I feel that we've touched on a lot of issues that would
Just
require
scratched
much
the
more
surface.
in-depth discussion that I think people could
We do a whole series.
could be interested.
I'd like it.
I would like to even
I would
try
like
and-
a 3-part
yeah.
series on racism.
I would like to try to make the next
2 hours.
conversation open phone.
Sure.
So people can call in, because
Yeah.
there's some
Because it
radical
seems like
ideas.
you welcome the
if you don't-
dialogue.
Yeah,
so
I
you're
mean,
re- you're certainly ready for it.
Yeah,
Well
we
done.
also we've also, I've tweeted out my cell phone address.
Right.
I've told the press they can call me. I've told people you can come to my home,
And you'll be interviewed in your home.
Yeah,
Elizabeth Warren refused to let them
Yeah, because
acknowledge
probably
where
she doesn't
lived.
probably want to show all the multi-million-dollar artwork that she has.
Thank you,
Right,
everybody.
exactly.
What a bourgeois she
Thank
really
you
is.
for coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.